Alex Hamilton says he wants to save Wrexham Football Club. Fans say he's trying to close the club and sell the land. He's already ordered the club to leave its historic Racecourse ground at the end of this season. The club's managing director has had enough, and tonight he accuses his boss of asset stripping.
He's not a football person. He came into Wrexham, he bought Wrexham as a property deal. He wanted to make money out of some kind of property deal at Wrexham.
Hamilton's attempts to win over the fans have backfired. He had to be escorted from the terraces by police. Wrexham fans took their protest to Hamilton's home. Leafy Cheshire has rarely seen anything like it. But is all this too late to stop Alex Hamilton helping himself to Wrexham Football Club's assets, behind the backs of shareholders and fans?
You don't actually need to be a lawyer to know that these are illegal transactions.
Mr. Hamilton,
we catch up with Hamilton to get answers.
I wanted to ask you, are you sure that the transfer of the Racecourse ground into your private company is legal?
These are turbulent times for Wrexham Football Club. Its future is on a knife edge amid talks of debts amounting to millions and asset stripping. For the last 2 years, this club has been owned by one man, and tonight we unravel the truth behind rumours surrounding Alex Hamilton. Those who were once close to Hamilton tonight speak out and cast light on the motives of the man blamed for the club's crisis.
There is an obvious atmosphere, there is an obvious problem where for the last 2.5 years the club has been owned by Alex Hamilton. He didn't make that known for a fair period of that. Mark Gutman, who was one of his business partners, was appointed chairman and seemed to be the owner and purported to be the owner of the club. Finally, became clear that Alex Hamilton owned it, and his intentions are certainly not clear for this club at this moment in time any more maybe than they have been for the last 2.5 years.
Fans share John Ream's concerns.
He's run down the commercial side. Wrexham must be the only club who won promotion and seen their income drop.
2 years ago, Alex Hamilton bought the controlling share of Wrexham Football Club. Keeping his own identity secret, he installed a business associate as chairman. Mark Gutman was a controversial choice among fans. He'd already taken local rivals Cheshire into administration and relegated from the Football League.
Mr. Gutman had stated all along he was the owner of the club, and then about a week before he left he said he was raising money to buy out Alex Hamilton, who we now worked out was the owner of the club.
The Racecourse ground has been home to Wrexham FC for more than 130 years and has hosted its fair share of epic matches. It's been touted as the Millennium Stadium of the North and is now a venue for international rugby. But it's best known for its classic footballing moments.
Jones making a near-post run. And maybe a chance here. Brilliant! What a goal!
And there was the Mickey Thomas screamer that helped beat Arsenal.
It's Thomas who takes it. Oh, what a goal, Mickey Thomas! He's done it, the magic little man.
The Racecourse holds many memories, not just for Wrexham, for Wales. And if a one ground that I look forward to, is Wrexham Football Club, because it's got something that gave me a start in life as a professional footballer. It's a crucial period for Wrexham Football Club. Players and managers go, fans are there forever. So I'm being a bit of a fan now, and I'm going to stick with them, and hopefully through this difficult time, Wrexham Football Club will remain at the Racecourse, and everything will be fine in the end.
The ground has a long history, and fans recently invested in its future by buying bricks in the new stand. There's lots of building work going on here. It's a prime site at the main gateway to the town. If it had planning permission, the Racecourse could be worth at least £10 million. Just the kind of land a property developer might dream of finding.
He's not a football person. He bought Wrexham as a property deal. He wanted to make money out of some kind of property deal at Wrexham. My problem with him, I don't think that he's concerned whether he leaves a football club behind him.
The lack of investment in Wrexham Football Club resulted in players not being paid. For 3 months out of 4, wages were late.
The players' wages weren't paid on time for virtually the whole season. And this was a season we could have been promoted. We weren't that far off it, but you could see the players' morale go down every month that they weren't getting paid. He doesn't seem to have taken any steps to pay bills as he's been going along, so we're ending up with big bills coming in from the Inland Revenue.
The Inland Revenue is currently charging the club £150 a day in interest on a debt of more than £800,000. Earlier this year, things got so bad, the bailiffs were called in. They assessed the club's assets down to the last plastic seat, floodlight and lawnmower. If the tax bill remains unpaid, those assets will be seized.
From the very first time I met Mr Hamilton, I explained to him that he needed to give the club then £200,000 to enable me to do a deal with the revenue. I could show you a number of times in writing where he had promised to do that. We're now into September and that £200,000 has never been available to me, and that's why the club has such a massive problem with the Inland Revenue. You take away that major debt, then the rest of the debts are all manageable.
The Racecourse ground stands on a huge plot of land. When Alex Hamilton took over the club, the ground was owned by Wolverhampton and Dudley Brewery. They leased it to the club for £1 a year. The club approached the brewery to buy the freehold, and it was sold to them for £300,000.
The club contacted the brewery that owned the freehold of the ground and persuaded them to sell it to Wrexham Football Club. Why? Because, as they said in numerous letters, it was vital to the security of Wrexham Football Club's well-being, which was correct then, it's correct today.
On the very same day that the brewery sold the ground to Wrexham Football Club, it was immediately transferred to another company, Damon's Limited. Damon's is wholly owned by Alex Hamilton. So the ground belonged to one company and the club belonged to another. But both were controlled by Alex Hamilton.
Within minutes, if not hours, of Wrexham Football Club buying the ground from the brewery, it was then transferred directly out of the ownership of the football club into one of Mr Hamilton's own companies. Now, if he had the best interests of the football club at heart, the football club today would own the freehold, and if it did, it would have no financial problems.
Anne Spanton is a company law specialist who studied Wrexham's accounts. She's concerned that shareholders have been left in the dark.
I was totally shocked. I've been practicing law now for in excess of 21 years, and I have never seen a transaction like that, because a major value asset cannot suddenly be worthless. Directors must always act in the best interest of the company. That cannot possibly be in the company's best interest to transfer out a major asset for £0. That can't be right. It also rides roughshod over the minority shareholders' interest in that company.
Mr Hamilton hasn't consulted us, no intention of consulting us, unless he's forced to. Treats us with contempt.
So when he transferred the freehold of the Racecourse ground into his own private company, were you consulted about that?
No. As I understand it, some of the other members of the board weren't even consulted. He just did it himself.
Certainly was totally the wrong thing to do if you had the best interests of Wrexham AFC at heart.
Alex Hamilton says the ground was transferred through a trust deed and maintains it was never owned by the club. But was the transfer wrong in the way it was executed? The key document we've obtained shows that the transfer of the land from the club to Damon's wasn't signed by anyone on behalf of Wrexham FC.
There's also a question mark over whether or not the transaction is legal in any event, because the document has not been executed correctly.
Hamilton had done it once. Would he try again to transfer assets from the club into his own companies? A former solicitor who lives here in Cheshire, Alex Hamilton was struck off by the Law Society 2 years ago for charges including allegations of mortgage fraud. He appealed, and most of the charges against him, including the mortgage fraud, were withdrawn. Reinstated last year, Hamilton now describes himself as a property developer.
The only things that we knew about Alex Hamilton were that he was a solicitor who had been struck off but then reinstated onto the solicitor's role, and that his company had been taken to the cleaners by two young girls who'd won discrimination claims against him because he sacked them when they were pregnant. That's all we knew, but none of it made encouraging reading to us.
Fans were getting worried. They organised mass opposition to Alex Hamilton's plans. He had dropped a bombshell. He said the racecourse would have to be sold if the club was to survive. Last July, he served a legal notice on the club to leave the racecourse within a year. After 130 years, this season could be the last that Wrexham play there.
Most significant change of all was the fact that the freeholder, which is Mr. Hamilton, could give the club 1 year's notice. And in fact, whilst I was away on holiday in July, that's exactly what he did. He served notice on the club. So at this moment in time, unless Mr. Hamilton changes his mind, Wrexham AFC will have to leave the racecourse ground at the end of this current season.
You can't really believe that somebody would want to move the club from the ground, and you also can't believe that somebody would want to kill the club off.
If Mr. Hamilton continues to own the football club and the freehold of the ground, then he's quite able to carry out his notice, and therefore Wrexham will be in an impossible position, I would suggest, at the end of this current season, because where would it play its games? There's certainly nowhere else in Wrexham. There have been suggestions that he's mentioned from time to time about Chester or Shrewsbury. I think the Football League would have great problems in sanctioning that.
Fans organised themselves into the Wrexham Supporters Trust with a view to taking control of the club and safeguarding the racecourse. They held a 2,000-strong march through the town on the first day of the new season last month. It demonstrated the fans' anger at the threat to their club. It signalled a declaration of war against the chairman. The very same day, Alex Hamilton responded.
It was the first game of the season against Swindon, and just a ripple went around the ground that Hamilton's on the cop, and everybody was like, "Well, where is he? Where is he?" And he was there. He'd walked onto the cop and started talking to a few people there, and this was in a week where he described the fans as low-life scum and one thing and another, and there he was in the middle of them, this guy who wants to move us from the ground, and he's asset stripping, and he's seen as the devil incarnate by Wrexham fans.
The move infuriated police. Hamilton had previously stated that any disturbances at the ground would see fans locked out. Fans thought his actions were an attempt to incite trouble.
We think he went on there in the hope that somebody would hit him, so that he could make a great political capital out of the fact that we were football hooligans and what have you. But most people just thought he was mad, and there are a lot of photos of him on the cop with people standing around him laughing. It's not something somebody rational does.
Hamilton says he wanted to talk to fans.
He struck me as a bit of a Robert Maxwell type character. He's a big guy, and he's got a very loud booming voice, and he's a bit of a bully, and he's a bit overbearing, and he's not somebody you'd have to dinner. He's also got a very quick temper. The least thing seems to set him off, and he's not somebody who should be in charge of a football club, or a burger van even, to be honest.
Hamilton has since been advised by the police not to attend home matches at his own club. Fans were in the dark about the chairman's intentions for the club. So too were directors. Managing director John Reams was seeing a pattern emerge.
Major events regarding assets or regarding leases never took place with proper board meetings. For instance, at the time the club purchased the freehold, there were 5 directors, 2 of which are still on the board and 3 who were persuaded to leave shortly afterwards, none of whom were involved, none of whom were aware of that transaction taking place. Now that cannot be right.
John Reams had had enough. He tried to go public and explain the situation to fans in a match programme. In it, he accused Alex Hamilton of asset stripping the club. But Alex Hamilton got wind of his plans. Club officials were ordered to tear out the offending page on the morning of the match.
Pages were destroyed by the staff on the instructions of Mr. Hamilton, but I think maybe that kind of rebounded on him because it became a more public situation than maybe it would have been with probably at best 1,500 programmes being sold for the game.
The fans' main concern had been that the club could be forced to move from the racecourse, but the loss of key assets was an even more serious threat to the club's very existence.
I hate to use the word asset stripping, but if he can see that he's not going to make the mega millions he initially was hoping to make, then he will look to feather his nest in other ways. I'm sure the Inland Revenue would be very interested in the fact that Mr. Hamilton's moving assets out of the club when the club actually owes the Inland Revenue close to about £1 million. Hope they don't find out.
A company that can't pay its bills can be put into administration, taking all day-to-day control of the business away from directors. That's serious enough for any company, but the spin-offs for a football club are potentially catastrophic. Not only does the club automatically lose 10 points in the league, but it's also in danger of losing its key assets, the players. Administration puts players out of contract, so they can be picked up by other clubs on free transfers. But Wrexham Football Club is not just an asset for its owners. It's seen as an asset for the entire town. Most here are against the club leaving the Racecourse ground.
He's alienated the public of Wrexham. He's alienated his own board members. He's alienated his own friends, people like Mark Gutterman. And most importantly, he's alienated the local council, who have been very strong in their support for keeping Wrexham Football Club at the Racecourse.
The council's position, the council's policy, if you like, is that it wants to see Wrexham Football Club continuing to succeed playing football at the Racecourse ground on Mould Road, and that the Racecourse ground, in the words of Alan Pugh, the minister if you like, becomes the Millennium Stadium of North Wales.
The Racecourse is the premier sports ground in North Wales, and Wrexham Council supports public ownership to ensure the ground's future.
That the only way that could be protected in the long term is through the stadium itself coming into public ownership. That may or may not mean the council, but certainly public ownership and public control, with a new landlord giving a secure future to a football club.
In public, Alex Hamilton has never been entirely clear about his plans. Over the past few months, he has unveiled scheme after scheme. One involved turning the pitch round 90 degrees. His latest plan, due to be unveiled in the next few days, is designed to enable the club to stay at the Racecourse. But people are losing patience and want Hamilton gone. An offer has already been made on behalf of local businessmen by John Reams to buy him out.
He found it a ludicrous offer. And
what was it worth, the offer?
Well, I did put to him a ballpark figure of £2 million, and when you consider that Mr. Hamilton at this moment in time has spent, including the purchases of various assets, less than £1 million, I felt it was a fairly, what I describe as handsome profit. His response to me was that he wouldn't move for less than £5 million. Well, bluntly, if that is the case, then the football club will die.
The fans themselves want to buy the club. They want to join the growing number of community-owned clubs.
I'd like to see a fans-run club at Wrexham, like there is at Chesterfield and York and many other places. The model of having a rich businessman or sugar daddy running a football club, just not relevant anymore. It never works out. People say that, well, fans can't run it, you need a businessman to run it, but businessmen are running the club at the moment and making a hash of it. The only way that Wrexham as a football club will move forward is to get all the fans involved.
If wealthy businessmen struggle to run a club, it's going to be difficult for fans, isn't it?
Why?
Well, just financially.
No. When you say wealthy businessmen, we're not talking about Mr. Hamilton's actually put any money into the club. He's not invested in the club. He's loaned the club money, which he's now taking back in chunks of land. He's not actually invested in the club. And if the state of Wrexham Football Club now is any testimony to Mr. Hamilton's business skills, then I don't think... I've got a 4-year-old lad who's just started school, and I think he could do a better job than Alex Hamilton in running a football club.
Wrexham's managing director is now in open conflict with his chairman.
My final challenge to him was 3 weeks ago at a board meeting. Since that moment in time, I haven't spoken to Alex Hamilton again.
In another twist to this tale, Alex Hamilton's holding an extraordinary general meeting of shareholders tomorrow. There is only one item on the agenda, and that's the removal of John Reams and 2 other directors, Dave Bennett and Dave Griffiths, both local men with a long track record of supporting this club. If he succeeds, and he owns 78% shares, there will only be 2 directors remaining, Mr. Hamilton and his personal assistant.
The club's chequebook has disappeared and arrived at his house. Various important files with regard to the Inland Revenue, Customs and Excise have also disappeared from the club and at his house, and it makes my job either to manage or direct the football club nigh impossible.
Wrexham has 300 minority shareholders, and they now want to know Alex Hamilton's game plan.
There are legal entitlements that we have with the club, like any other limited company, must have an AGM. It must be regular. You simply don't leave the AGM for over 2 years, keep shareholders in the dark, and then tell them stories that may or may not be true. It's so contradictory, they can't all be true.
In a normal company with minority shareholders, they wouldn't have to be concerned about somebody transferring the assets out for nil value. It's just not common, it's not normal, and it's not legal.
I don't think he's come up against that much resistance so far. I think he's had the best part of 2 years of peace and quiet for him to get on with whatever it was he was doing. He hasn't really got very far with it. If he thinks he's seen resistance up to now, he's not seen anything yet.
10 days ago, fans went to Hamilton's house and staged a peaceful protest to bring it home to the chairman and his neighbours how determined they are to win this battle. They were angry that the racecourse had been transferred to Hamilton's company. To make matters worse, the rent the club was now paying had increased from £1 a year to £30,000 a year. As well as the racecourse, the club also owns 2 other land assets: Stanstey playing fields on the outskirts of Wrexham and Collier's Park training ground. Today, Alex Hamilton told us he'd paid £90,000 to the club to transfer Stanstey to his own personal ownership. John Reams says it was done without shareholders' approval.
When I returned from holiday, I discovered that in fact Stanstey had been transferred out of the ownership of the football club, and he subsequently explained to me that he'd decided that he would take it against monies that he'd previously put into the football club. Now, there is no way that was helpful in any way to Wrexham Football Club, and I wasn't sure of the legality of what had happened.
When a director is a director of a company, he must act in the best interest of the company at all times. And he clearly hasn't done that, because he's transferred out the assets of that company, therefore diminishing the value of the company to the shareholders for his own benefit.
But this isn't just a rerun of the Racecourse transfer. This time it wasn't as straightforward, and it could prove to be Alex Hamilton's undoing.
3 years ago, Wrexham FC agreed to pay Lex Football Club £80,000 for these pitches. We understand that the full amount was never actually paid, and in fact about half of it remains outstanding.
So if the Stanstey pitches haven't been fully paid for by Wrexham, can Alex Hamilton transfer them from the club's control?
If you haven't finished paying for it, so if you're part of the way through paying, you've only paid the deposit on your new house, the house isn't yours yet. You've got to pay the full purchase monies and then you complete. So in the same way with land, if you've paid part of the purchase price, it will not be transferred to you until you've completed that transaction. You don't actually need to be a lawyer to know that these are illegal transactions.
Mr. Hamilton may have thought he was dealing with a bunch of Sunday League amateurs, but being a former solicitor himself, he should have known that Lex is in fact Latin for law. A name well chosen, because this club was set up by a group of lawyers.
Mr. Hamilton refused our requests for an interview to discuss the Racecourse and Stanstey transfers. We went to the Racecourse, where he was attending a board meeting.
Wales Week In Week Out programme. I wanted to ask you, are you sure that the transfer of the Racecourse ground into your private company is legal?
We came here
Can you answer that question,
We
please?
came here to deal with that passing away. We came here to deal with passing away.
Mr. Hamilton, please
I came here to deal with one topic, which is a passing away of irregular support.
You've been in a board meeting. You've been in a board meeting. Mr. Hamilton, you're being accused of asset stripping this club. What do you have to say about that?
Total rubbish.
It's not rubbish. Why have you transferred the freehold of this club into your own... Why have you transferred the freehold of this club into your own company? Why have you done that,
We're here to deal with Mr. Lovelace passing away.
Please stop and talk to us, Mr. Hamilton. These are really important issues we want to discuss with you.
Mr. Hamilton was not at the funeral. He was attending a directors' meeting at the club. Late today, Alex Hamilton sent us a statement. He believes the Racecourse and Stanstey transfers are legal. He also says his personal ownership of Stanstey is lawful, despite Wrexham's outstanding debt to Lex Football Club. Tomorrow's meeting of shareholders could spark dramatic changes at the club. Rumours of a takeover could herald the end of Alex Hamilton's reign at the Racecourse.
On a personal note, I don't feel Mr. Hamilton should profit from his time at Wrexham one bit. I'd like to see him selling the big issue.
But I think, as I said, Mr. Hamilton should take a little bit of a look at himself and think, I'm not the right man for this job. Let someone else who's got love for the football club, wants the club to succeed, and walk away. Probably not easy, but it's the best thing you can do.
Thank you very much.
A complaint from Lex Football Club has now been lodged with police.
Week In Week Out is back at the same time next week on BBC One Wales, and you can see the whole of tonight's programme again whenever you like during the coming week at bbc.co.uk/weekinweekout.